All right, let's dive into something that might just flip everything you think you know about psychopathy right on its head. We're talking about a wild theory called the paradox of the frozen heart. And yeah, it basically says we've been looking at callousness all wrong.
So get this. What if the coldest people out there, the ones we think feel nothing, actually feel too much? Like, so much that their own biology has to slam on the brakes just to survive. It's a huge counterintuitive question, and that's exactly what we're digging into today.
You know, for the longest time, the standard thinking was pretty simple, right? Psychopathy was basically a missing empathy chip. The hardware just wasn't there. But this new idea, it throws that right out the window. It says, no, it's not a missing chip. It's a blown fuse. It's an emergency shutdown, an adaptation, because the system was just overwhelmed with feeling.
Okay, so let's get into the first part, the paradoxical hypothesis. And to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to be willing to challenge a belief that's been a cornerstone of psychology for, like, ever.
So here's the core idea. What we've been calling a pathology, this lack of feeling, might not be a flaw at all. It could be an incredibly sophisticated survival strategy. Think about that. Not a deficit, but a defense mechanism that kicks in because of way too much sensitivity, especially early in life. But how? How could a system be pushed to do something so drastic? Well, to get that, we need to talk about the fundamental rules of survival. And that brings us to our second big idea, something called the Tower of Criticality.
I want you to picture a tower, okay? The foundation, the absolute base level, is all our core biological stuff. Oxygen, energy, basic safety. Then, as you go up, you get more complex things, like our sense of self. And way up at the top, that's where you find the luxury items, like empathy and deep social connection. The rule of this tower is dead simple. If the foundation gets shaky, everything above it comes crashing down.
And this whole hierarchy makes even more sense when you think about time. A neuron starves in milliseconds. The brain can only last minutes without blood. See how fast that is? The person and social levels are built on this incredibly fragile biological reality. So when that base level feels threatened, the system just can't afford a luxury good like empathy. It's gotta go.
This quote really nails it, doesn't it? The stability of a superior level depends absolutely on the stability of the inferior level. It's a non-negotiable law of biology. When your core survival is on the line, the system will always jettison the fancy higher-level stuff to save the mothership. And empathy? Yeah, that's often first on the chopping block.
Okay, so the system is primed to shut down empathy when threatened. So who's most at risk for this happening? That brings us to part 3, the overwhelmed hypersensitive core. Because the argument here is that the story doesn't start with a cold, unfeeling kid. It starts with a kid who feels everything, way too much.
So our brains have this amazing tool. Let's call it the fractal mirror. It's how we learn. You see someone touch a hot stove, your brain kind of simulates that ouch feeling, and boom, you learn. Don't touch the stove. It's an incredible survival tool. But what if your mirror is like too high definition? What if it simulates someone else's pain with so much intensity that it feels like you're the one being traumatized? You can see how this quickly becomes a nightmare feedback loop. The hypersensitive kid feels a parent's distress or anger. Their superpowered fractal mirror doesn't just register it as a warning, it experiences it as direct personal trauma. The pain is just unbearable. So what can the system do? It's cornered. The only option left is to smash the mirror, shut down the whole empathy circuit just to make the pain stop.
So that's the why, right? It's a desperate act of self-preservation. Now let's talk about the how. Is there any actual biological evidence for this kind of empathy shutdown switch? That's what we're looking at in part 4.
Well, yeah, there is. And it comes from this really groundbreaking fMRI study. Researchers had individuals with psychopathy watch videos of people in pain and looked at their brain activity. And at first glance, the results seemed to, they seem to confirm everything we thought we already knew. Just as you'd expect, the empathy centers in their brains were quiet, very little spontaneous activity. By default, the lights were off. So, case closed, right? It's the classic missing chip theory in action.
But then came the twist. A huge one. The researchers then asked them to try to empathize. And what happened? Those same quiet brain regions lit up like a Christmas tree. Their brain activity became basically identical to the control group.
This is massive. It means the hardware was never missing. It was there the whole time, fully functional. It was just switched off. It's a switch, people, not a deficit.
So what is this biological switch? Well, it's tied to one of our most ancient survival circuits, the dorsal vagal shutdown. It's the freeze response. When an animal or a human infant is trapped and can't fight or run away, the body's last-ditch effort is to just shut down, go numb, disconnect. It's a way to endure an inescapable threat. And for some people, that emergency state never turns off. It becomes their default way of life.
And yeah, this emergency shutdown works. It saves the organism. But as we're about to see in Part 5, surviving like this comes with an absolutely massive long-term price tag. Let's talk about the high cost of survival. I love this quote because it just says it all. The low arousal of the adult is the burnt-out husk of the infant's high arousal. That seemingly calm, cool adult, they're what's left over after a childhood spent with the nervous system redlining 24/7.
Because living in that shutdown state is exhausting. I mean, metabolically, it costs a ton of energy. It leads to something called allostatic overload, which is basically a fancy term for a complete and total burnout of your body's entire stress system. So that calm exterior we see isn't calm at all. It's exhausting.
And over time, this functional change starts to become a structural one. You know the phrase, use it or lose it? That's a real biological principle called use-dependent plasticity. The brain's circuits for empathy that are always being shut down, well, they start to physically shrink, to atrophy. We often hear about things like a smaller amygdala being a cause of psychopathy, but what if it's not the cause? What if it's the scar? The physical evidence of a system that's been in shutdown mode for years.
Okay, I know this all sounds incredibly grim, but it raises one last and maybe most important question. That brings us to our final section, rewriting the trauma code. Is any of this reversible?
I mean, really? Is the damage permanent? Can this whole downward spiral, this vector of collapse, actually be turned around?
This is where things get really interesting. The theory suggests that the very same raw, intense energy that caused the system to collapse on itself, well, that energy can be redirected. If, and this is a big if, the system can finally be made to feel safe, that incredible intensity doesn't just vanish. It can be turned outward. It can fuel amazing creativity, incredible focus, even powerful leadership.
And that leaves us with a really provocative final thought to chew on. What if the goal isn't to fix a person we see as broken? What if the real goal is to create an environment that's so safe, so stable, and so predictable that their own intelligent, super-sensitive system finally feels secure enough to flip that switch back on and start to heal itself?